Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're just going to wait around 10 or 20 seconds before we get started here, just to make sure all of our attendees have a chance to sign in. Okay, so it looks like everyone is signed in here, so let's get started with today's webinar. So today we're going to be talking about data breaches. We'll be looking at why they occur, the impact that they can have on your business, and what you can do to prevent them. This is an issue that's becoming more and more prevalent, with a number of major companies feeling the heat of data breaches in 2018. But before we jump into the webinar, I just want to make you aware of a couple of housekeeping options. We'll be holding a quick Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you do have any questions, you should be able to see a questions panel on the screen. So please feel free to ask your questions there, and we'll answer as many as we can. We also have a really great offer for the attendees of today's webinar. So make sure to stick around to the end and see what that offer is. So today's webinar is going to be around 20 to 30 minutes long. Your hosts for today are myself, Coralie Wood, and my colleague Alice Liang, and we're LoginRadius product experts. Alice is going to be walking us through the majority of today's webinar, so I'll hand over to her now to get started.
Awesome, thanks Coralie. So here's just a brief overview of what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be looking at the data breaches that happened in 2018 and some associated statistics, and really the costs of those data breaches as well. And then what it comes down to is prevention. So we're also going to touch on how you can prevent these data breaches from happening to you. So to start with, what is a data breach? We've heard a lot about data breaches in the last couple of years. So a data breach is really an event where someone's name or sensitive information, what we call personally identifiable information, including anything like a social security number or medical financial records, are at risk due to an infiltrated data source. So in 2018, we've seen a lot of data breaches that occurred. One of the biggest ones is probably the Marriott one, where they lost around 500 million records. So in comparison to 2017, there's some good and bad news. So the total number of breaches reported in 2018 is down by 23% in comparison to 2017. However, the number of exposed records is up by 126%. And from the different companies, from the different reports that came out, it's really clear that data breaches aren't distincted by industry. It's really across all industry, across all regions. Essentially, if you have data, it can be breached. So breaking down that number even further, so the total number of reported breaches that occurred in 2018 was around 1,200, and the total number of records exposed is around 450 million. So keep in mind, this number is only that sensitive data, right? For including, social insurance number, names and such, basic data you can use to identify a person. However, if we include in all the non-sensitive data, such as emails, passwords, usernames, whatnot, the total number of records really goes up into the billions. So what are people really targeting when they're for these data breaches, really? So the highest exposed sensitive data across all industries is the social security number and the credit card or payment information. The one exception is in the medical and healthcare industry, where people are really targeting that personal health information and medical records. There are a few different ways of how these attacks occur. So Identity Theft Resource Center, the ITRC, they've been keeping track of data breaches since around 2005. They have an annual report every year. And essentially, they track 7 different types of attacks, anywhere from hacking to insider theft or employee error or physical theft of the actual database. And what they found in 2018 is that the most common type of attacks occur through hacking, unauthorized access, or accidental exposure.
So one of the logos we actually saw there was Marriott, and that's probably a company that people are going to recognize as a company that had a data breach at the end of 2018 there, and they lost around 500 million records. And it was actually recently revealed that that was passport data that was stolen.
Yeah, so the passport data is a really good example of that personally identifiable information that they were definitely targeting during that attack. So moving forward, how can these data breaches affect your business? I think the most relevant kind of outcome or the most relevant consequence is most people jump directly to the financial consequences, the loss of money or the money that you have to spend to contain that data breach for reporting, investigating, and all that. But really, there is a long-term consequences as well in terms of a loss of reputation and trust from your customers. So just kind of at a glance, the total cost of a data breach in 2018, the average cost actually is around 3.86 million. When you look at it, the average cost per record is about $148. So just looking at number, it may not seem like a lot, but when you multiply that by millions of records lost, that's where you get the millions in cost as well. So kind of breaking that down by region, as we know, it's a global economy these days. Lots of companies have presence around the world in different regions. So breaking that down, we can see that the US, Canada, and Germany had the highest cost per record for a data breach, ranging from over $200 to just under. And the US actually had the highest total average cost for the data breach at 7.91 million, so just under $8 million. Spent on a breach. So what it comes down to is reaction time. So how do you mitigate that cost if a breach does occur? So reaction time here is critical. So it's shown that if when the data is reported and contained within 30 days, the average cost is about $3 million. However, if it extends over 30 days, you're really increasing your costs by over $4 million. So that reaction time can really save you millions in dollars. And then kind of breaking down that cost by the cause of the data breach. So the Poneman study kind of breaks down the causes by 3 categories, which is very similar to the ITRC study that we saw earlier. So they break it down by malicious or criminal attack, a system glitch, or human error. And we can see the higher percentage of the breach of the attack is directly associated with the cost per record. So cost per record, a stolen record for malicious or criminal attack is around $157 per record.
So I think it's really important here to talk about how quickly you respond to a breach being particularly critical, especially to Canadian companies who are actually now required by law to disclose data breaches that exposed sensitive information.
So in response to the breaches that have been occurring in recent years, the Canadian government put in place a new law that came into effect in November 1st, where Canadian companies are now required to share their knowledge of any data breaches where the leaked data could cause a real significant harm, and they have to share that information with the Privacy Commission of Canada, their customers, as well as any third parties that may be affected by the breach. So kind of moving on is kind of breaking that cost down even further, right? Because we're just seeing millions is a really big number, but what actually makes up that cost? There's a few different factors that go into that. So the first one that we look at is the customer churn. So the pattern that we can see throughout the past couple of years is really the more customers cost during following a breach, the higher the average total cost of that data breach. So, we can see in 2018, if a company loses less than 1% of customers post a breach, their cost kind of comes down to just under $3 million. However, if they lose more than 4% of customers post a breach, it's really kind of doubles that number. And then again, kind of breaking that down by region, we can see there's certain countries that experience a higher churn rate than others, which means that for those regions, the associated cost for these customer churn is also higher. In terms of industries, the health and financial industry take the biggest hit in terms of customer churn, well, because those are the industries that obviously deal with the most more sensitive data than other industries do. Another factor that goes into the cost of a data breach is the size of the breach. So really, how many records were stolen during that data breach? And the general pattern is the more records lost, the higher the cost of the breach. So on average, if it's a smaller breach, less than 10,000 records, we can see numbers around 2 million. However, for larger breaches, anything more than 50,000, we can see that number is tripled to around $6 million. Another factor that goes into the cost is that detection and escalation cost, right? So this is anywhere between around, the investigative costs, forensic investigations, any internal assessments, infrastructure assessments, security audits that needs to be done. Some companies, especially if it's large breach, they'll have to put together a special committee, a team that centralizes around, identifying the causes and really mitigating that the effects and consequences of that breach, as well as any internal communication to executive management and board members and such. Essentially, your internal stakeholder communication. And and also, again, just breaking that down a little bit, we can see the countries here, the countries with the highest detection and escalation costs. And again, kind of bringing it more on a global scale, you can kind of see that these data breaches, they're not differentiated by region, right? We can see countries here with those high costs from all across the globe and different continents. And that last piece of that cost is the response cost. So this is really that post-breach communication, customer communication, things that happen. So help desk activities, post-breach, you're bound to have a higher number of, an increased number of customers who are wanting to know what's going on with their data, with their accounts and such, as well as any fees that are associated with any legal actions that occur post the data breach. Also, we can see that customer churn is obviously a really big factor in the cost. So when a part of the response costs also include any kind of activities that the companies are doing to help retain those customers as well. And again, breaking that down by country, you can see the highest response cost comes from the States. However, with the breakdown, you can see, again, there's no discrimination in terms of data breaches. Kind of countries all across the globe experience the same thing. You can see anywhere from North America to Europe to Asia. So what this has really become is what researchers are now coined a new term called data breach fatigue. Customers are now so accustomed to data breaches so that they're now less motivated to take the action to protect themselves. Every day, every so often now, we always see a new report of a new data breach that's happening. So it's becoming an everyday occurrence that people are becoming desensitized to it, that really it's becoming not a big deal.
But yeah, obviously with customers maybe now seeing this as being a new normal, we certainly wouldn't want to encourage companies to kind of sit back and not take action to prevent their customer data.
No, for sure. So now I think it's kind of a thing where when when companies step up and really put the proper security measures in place to ensure that to protect their customers from data breaches, these are the companies that are going to stand out, that are going to be able to build better relationships and be able to retain those customers. So having said that, how do we prevent the data breaches from happening? And it's actually quite simple. The key is really that data management and security, right? So the key, it's really crucial to know what you're collecting and making sure that that data is secure. To know what you're collecting is really removing those data silos to make sure that that data is centralized. So when you pull up your customer data, you have a clear view of what you're collecting, you have a clear view of everything that you have. Right? It's only with that clear view can you make sure that the proper security and compliance measures are put in place so that nothing gets left behind for others to either stumble on or to maliciously enter your system and grab. And another crucial aspect of this is encryption. So it's definitely very important to make sure that your data is encrypted both in transit, so it's moving between systems, and at rest when it's sitting in that data store, right? So with this, it's another layer of security in case if someone does, make their way through, hack their way through your system, that data is encrypted. So even if they have access to it, they won't be able to read the full thing and have full access that they want. So kind of bringing it all together, in 2018, we definitely saw, even though we saw a decrease in the number of reports, there is a definite increase in the number of stolen records. And we can kind of see from the cost of a data breach, obviously starts in the millions, but really how much that costs you is depending on a few different factors, from customer churn to especially that most important, that critical reaction time. And really the prevention comes around centralizing your data management, making sure that you have proper security around that data, and knowing exactly what it is that you have.
Awesome, thanks Alice. So as we've seen today, the impact of a data breach is significant, not only in the short term, but also in the long term in terms of your brand perception and what that means for the number of customers that you're engaging. And the reality is that these data breaches are actually highly preventable. So as I mentioned at the start of today's webinar, we actually have an offer for the people that have attended today. And what we want to offer you is an opportunity to see if there are any steps that you need to take in your organization to avoid becoming a 2019 data breach statistic. So for attendees to today's webinar, we're offering a free security assessment. And in this assessment, what we can do is we'll help you identify improvements that can be made to your data security, opportunities for improvements to your registration system, and how you can secure your data to improve your customer experience. We're going to be sending out an email to everyone that attended with the instructions on how to sign up for this assessment, so make sure to look out for that email today. I will say that this is a limited time offer, so you're going to want to make sure that you look out for that email and claim that assessment within the next 24 hours. Okay, so just to wrap up today, let's move on to a quick Q&A session. We've had a few questions coming in. So Alice, one of the questions we have here is, what are the most common things that companies can do to fix their infrastructure after a breach occurs?
So one of the most common things that they can do is really analyze and assess their infrastructure and their systems, right? So when they do that, they can really do a full analysis of everything and recognize and see where those loopholes are of how that breach could have occurred. It's really identifying that problem, that full assessment, identifying that problem that can help them kind of move towards resolving it.
Awesome. Another question that we have here is, do you think, 2018 was obviously a really big year in terms of the data breaches that were reported. And do we think that we're going to continue to see this trend, or do we think that companies are starting to get smarter and more diligent about the way they're protecting their customer data?
I think it's a bit about, so it's a good question. So companies now, what we see are companies are putting more emphasis on security. So with the emergence of the data breaches, a lot of companies are now putting more resources and time towards securing their systems and their data. However, we also see customers who may not be as concerned about data security. But one aspect of this is we saw that even though the number of reports lessened, the number of records increased, and the number of records stolen increased. So really, with companies being smarter, so are the hackers. But I think it's really, ensuring your security and having more companies be aware of this will definitely help in the future.
Awesome. So I think that looks like we've answered the questions that came in. It doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in right now. So we'll wrap up here, and we'll let everyone get back to their days. So we hope that everybody found the webinar informative. Again, just a quick reminder that you are going to see that email coming through later today with that offer. Again, this is just going to be live for 24 hours, so we strongly suggest that you take advantage of that. It's a real opportunity to have a LoginRadius product expert take a look at your current infrastructure and see what can be done to protect that customer data. We are going to be holding more webinars in the coming months, so please look out for the invite for those. And thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks.